Okay, today we're down in Ecclesiastes chapter 5. If you're visiting with us today and haven't heard the background of the book of Ecclesiastes, let me just enumerate it for just a short minute so that we can understand really what is going on. Solomon, the richest, wisest man who ever lived, wrote this book of Ecclesiastes, and he wrote it for a unique purpose. He is going to tell us, let us suppose there is no God. Let's suppose there's no life after death. What should a human being do on this earth to be happy? And so he is looking at it really from that approach. Now let me then say this, that the book of Ecclesiastes, the writer believes in God. Every once in a while he will mention God. But when you get down to the last chapter, then he opens up and he says, now here is the answer to life. Here is what you do in order to be happy. But all during this period of time, he is showing us things that will not make us happy. Now, all of us go through life looking at various things and thinking, if we had this, I would be happy. If I just had that, I would be happy. And most of us kind of center in on the same things. We think about really three major things, and that is that if we had a lot of wisdom so that we knew everything. In other words, we didn't really do any foolish things. We just filled full of wisdom so that we could see things that were going to happen. And then if we had wealth, all kind of wealth, so that there's no limitation on anything I can do. I can go and do anything I want to do. Thank you, Rod. I have no limitations on money. Solomon was the richest man that ever lived. So if I just had this money, I certainly could find happiness. And then we have pleasure. If I could just enjoy life, if I could just sit down and think, now, what will give me the most pleasure today? And then if I were able to snap my finger and make it happen, I would be a happy man. If every day all I had to do is get out of bed and say, what do I want to do today? What do I want to do in order to have fun? And then all I have to do is just speak it, because that was what Solomon had. He didn't have to go to a lot of work to make it come to pass. But he would just tell his servants, here's what I want. And so then all of the pleasure would be brought to him. And so he said, now these are the things that I've had. And I want to let you know that none of these things will bring happiness in this life. Now he said, some of these things are better than others. It's a whole lot better to be wise than it is to be a fool. Because if you're a fool, it just puts you in a whole lot more trouble. So if you've got a choice between wisdom and fool, take wisdom. That's a whole lot better. But don't expect wisdom to bring you happiness. Now, if you have a choice in being really poor, not having enough to eat, or being rich, take rich. Rich is better than being poor. But don't ever think that if you are really rich, that will bring you happiness. And so he goes through these things, telling us the bad things about them, trying to educate us, trying to get us to see what is life about on this earth. Now you think about the book of Ecclesiastes, and that's a rather unique book. All the other books are telling us things mainly that deal with spiritual things. Even in the history books. It might be telling us about the history of Israel, but it's telling us about this so it brings us down to Christ, so that we can see that we can be saved. But the book of Ecclesiastes is a different book. It's kind of like the Song of Solomon. That's a different book. Song of Solomon is about love, courting love. Love before you're married. What do you do? What is love about during those courting years? You don't find that in other books. And in the book of Ecclesiastes, you don't find these answers. And so the whole book is given by a man who has experienced it all, understands it all, and then tells you, now here is my experience in life. So now when we're down to chapter 5, we're going to be jumping from one thing to another thing. And he's going to tell us, now when you see this happen and you get really upset, don't let it ruin your life. And then he'll jump to another thing. Then he'll jump to another thing. So in here, he's trying to kind of pack his book full and saying, now here are things that make you happy, or here are things that make you unhappy. Now I want to give you a little advice about them and look at them so that you can understand they're not really worth all that trouble. So he starts out in chapter 5, verse 1. Walk prudently when you go into the house of God, and draw near to hear rather than to give the sacrifices of fools, for they do not know that they do evil. Now I say, let me give you some advice. As you're living life on this earth, when you go into the house of God, when you go before God, you go in to worship Him, you go in to offer sacrifice. When you approach God, watch your mouth. Be careful what you say. Because he shows here that there are people that go in and they you're to draw nigh with your heart rather than your mouth. He said because people that do evil, they just go in, they think they know what they're doing, so they just go in and blah, 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 blah. Now today, we're living in a generation that fits this. When you boil everything down with all of the religious divisions, and especially when you get down into Protestantism here in America, and you look at all of the thousands of different churches that there are throughout America, and you say, well, what is the difference? Well, you go look them up on the web, and each one of them will tell you what they are, the uniqueness. For instance, if I decided to start a church, I'm going to start another church here in Monroe. Well, you'd say, Lowell, why are you doing that? I said, well, come, I want you to come with me. You would say, why? What are you doing that for? I'd have to have a reason. So, in today's culture, I'd sit down, I'd put it down on the web and tell you what it is, and you look it up. Now, it all boils down to this. The reason that there's so much division in America, especially in Protestantism, is because we do what we think is best. We do what we want to do. If I were going to start a church on my own, I would say, now the reason I'm going to start this is because I think the people here at Monroe Valley, they don't have this, they don't have that, they don't do this, and I'm going to fulfill those needs. I'm going to come up with ideas. I'm going to make it pleasant. I'm going to make it fun. I'm going to make it so you'll want to come back. Now you stop to think, that really is what it is all about. Now he said people who do this, they think they are right. They are telling you, here's what we do. I just know here's what God would want me to do. It doesn't make sense. I know God would want me to, and then I come up with some idea. Now what he's saying here, when you get into religious practice, make sure you keep your mouth shut and you open up your ears. You listen to what God has to say, and don't try to tell people what you think is right and wrong. He said, because unless you do this, you're going to end up the same way as all of these other people. Then in verse 2, do not be rash with your mouth, and let not your heart utter anything hastily before God. Now, when you're dealing with God, be really careful of what you say. Now, it's pretty simple. You can make it pretty simple. You say, why? Well, when you approach God in any way, shape, or form, who really would be in charge of this conversation? Now, let's just move it back down to people. Suppose the President of the United States came, walked in here, and said, Lowell, I want to go home with you for dinner today. Okay. So now he's going to go home with me. Now, how would I conduct myself? Do you suppose that I would say, well, President, have a seat right here, and let me tell you something. Now, blah, 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 and blip, 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 and so I'd just start talking, and I'd start giving him advice, or do you think I'd be really careful? That I'd sit back and I'd wait and let him talk. If he had something he wanted to talk to me about. I'd be very careful just with a human being. See? Now he said, when you approach God, be very careful about your mouth. Be very careful and kind of be all ears. He said, for God is in heaven and you on earth. Remember how much greater he is than you are. Therefore, let your words be few. So only speak that which needs to be spoken. When you're dealing in the religious realm, or you're dealing with anything before God, don't let your mouth start telling God what is right and wrong, what to do or what not to do. Just be all ears and listen to what God has to say. And then he says, for a dream cometh through much activity, and a fool's voice is known by his many words. So he said, now when you find a man who does a lot of talking, just blah, 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 blah. President comes to visit me, blah, 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 blah. Somebody else comes to visit me, I say, now blah, 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 blah. I have advice for everybody. What would you call me? See? What would you call me? I once asked Homer Haley about a very well-known preacher, whom I'll not mention, but he was Homer's age, known throughout the world, great reputation. I asked Homer one time, I said, have you ever had the opportunity to visit with him? And Homer said, nope, never have. He said, I've spent quite a lot of time with him and I listened to him, but I never had any time to visit with him. He does all the talking. Right? Well, that's what this is talking about. So this guy had a reputation. And that's what this is saying. Now, if you're talking to God or even humans, be careful about how many words you have. So he goes on and he says in here, for a dream comes through much activity. If you have a dream, you want to go into business, you want to do this or that, you want to bring something to happen, you do it through activity. You do it through work, not through bragging, not through talking about how great you are, not through that. You do it through hard work. So a dream comes to pass through that hard work and not through your talking is really what it has to say. And when you make a vow to God, do not delay to pay it. For he has no pleasure in fools. Pay what thou vowed. Better not to vow than to vow and not pay. So I said, now keep this in mind. Don't take a vow before God and then not keep it. If you take a vow before God and you promise him, then you keep your promise. Because he is God and you're man. Now he said it's better not to make a vow than to make one and not keep it. This again is where my lips get me in trouble. So we're out and I talking about this. Well, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do this. I swear to God that I'll... How many times you hear that word? Okay. Now, it doesn't make any difference maybe what it's talking about. It just may be talking about going to the Puyallup Fair next year. And a person said, well, I haven't been there for 3 or 4 years, but I swear to God I'll be going this next year. Well, now, okay. You have sworn to God. Suppose that your job transfers you to New York. And so next month you're transferred to New York. Next September, the Puyallup Fair comes on. What are you going to do? You see, you were blowing at your mouth when you didn't understand what will happen the next day. But you swore before God. Paul explains that he said, just let your yea be yea and your nay, nay. And James says, you say, if God wills. So yeah, if God is willing, I am planning on going to the Puyallup Fair next year. So be careful with the swearing, he says. And yet, we hear that done all the time. In verse 6, do not let your mouth cause your flesh to sin, nor say before the messenger of God that it was an error. Why should God be angry at your excuse and destroy the work of your hands? Don't swear. I swear to God, here's what I'm going to do. And then you can't do it. And so then you say, well, it was an error. I shouldn't have said that, and so God will understand. I made a mistake. I didn't say it. I shouldn't have said it. So no, he said, don't give that as an excuse. Why should God be angry at your excuse and destroy the work of your hands? You see, God is so important that you don't do anything that fools around with the name of God. Of when the Ten Commandments were given, and when God was dealing with his image and his name, and do not take my name in vain. Don't use God's name in vain. What does that mean? Don't use God's name in a way that doesn't have a purpose and a meaning, a productive thing to happen. Don't use his name in bywords of and then bring out God. Now this is again a common thing we're living in. In fact, this last year, the Oxford Dictionary added new terms, new words in the English vocabulary, as they do every year. And the new one that they added this year was OMG, I guess it is. It's OMG. And they describe it, it means, oh my God. Now, how do you use that? Oh, you look and you see a mouse running in. Oh my God. Wait a minute. Now, my God, I'm using God's name. What does it have to do? It's a mouse that ran through here. I'm a little scared. So what do? I use God's name. I hit my finger, and I use God's name. I get mad at a person, and I start to tell him off, and I use God's name to tell him how bad he is. And so you get to thinking about how do we use God's name. Now, as far as I know, we here are the only culture, English-speaking people, that uses the name of God in a derogatory sense. You would never hear anybody else use the name of their God. Doesn't make any difference who it is, whether it's Buddha or somebody else, in a derogatory, useless way. It's always with reverence that they use it. And that's what God tells us to do. When we use the name of God, let's make sure we do it with reverence, with respect, never use it in vain, where it's just an empty phrase. It's always a meaningful thing. So check our life and see if we do this. And he said in verse 7, for in the multitude of dreams and many words there's also vanity, but fear God. So when we have a lot of talk and we have a lot of dreams, there's a lot of vanity. Vanity means that it comes to nothing. How many dreams have people had, let's say when they're 25, They're dreaming that when they're 35, they will have this. How many people have ever dreamed that they would do that? Well, everybody dreams it. How often does it come to pass? How often can you say, yes, that's what I dreamed, and that's what came to pass, just exactly as I was dreaming that it would? Very, very seldom. So he said, life is not made up of these words and so forth. Now, here's another problem, separate apart from that. But another problem that you face as you go through life. Anybody that lives on this planet has a problem that's going to make you unhappy. And here it is. If you see the oppression of the poor and the violent perversion of justice and righteousness in a province or state, do not marvel at the matter, for high officials watch over high official, and higher officials are over them. Now, he said, when you see justice that doesn't come to pass, well, how many times do you hear of a court, a judge, making an order from the bench, and you shake your head and say, that is unjust, that is not right, how many times do we hear that? And we see it happen here in America. It's just a constant thing. Just a constant thing that we see. So now, if your life is going to be ruined, and you're not going to find any happiness next week, if you hear of a court case where the judge rules in the wrong way, and it upsets you so much you can't find happiness, then get ready. You're never again going to have a happy day on this life. Now you say, well, what do I do then? I just don't care about justice. It doesn't make me any difference if a judge rules in the wrong way and oppresses the poor and the righteous. That doesn't bother me. No, it should bother you. It should bother you, but he said, keep this in mind. Here's something you got to keep in mind. There are other judges over that judge, and then there's a judge over that judge. So he said, you keep in mind the order system in this world is that we do have some checks and balances. We do have judges over them that is in there. And in verse 9, moreover, he throws this in, the profit of the land is for all, even the king is served from the field. Now I want to throw that in because that's a rather unusual statement. You say, what does that have to do with justice? Let's read that again. What does that have to do with justice? It says, moreover, the profit of the land is for all, even the king is served from the field. Now, everybody eats from the field out here. And even the king eats from the field. What does that have to do with what we're talking about? Well, what I would see is this. He said, keep this in mind. When you see powerful people and they render unjust decisions and they're unfair and you're upset, I want you to keep in mind that there is an equalizer in this the whole world. And that is, everybody gets their food from the same source. Everybody gets their food from the field. When you look out and you see the crops growing or wherever it is, that's where our food comes from. We're all, I don't care whether you're rich or whether you're poor. It doesn't make any difference. I don't care whether you sit down at a $200 meal tonight or go to McDonald's. It doesn't make any difference. Everything you eat originated out there in the field. And it says, even the king is served from the field. He said, this is true even of the king. In other words, a king with all the power, all they can do to do evil, is brought down on the same level as the poorest human being that ever walked. They're brought down at the same level. In what respect? Every one of them, poorest man that ever lived, the most powerful king that ever existed, all walk on the same level in that they eat from the same source. So I'd understand it to say, just remember this. God is in control. God has seen that all people, I don't care who they are going to stand eventually in the same way. Even a king is going to be brought low, as we read about last week. And you read about, you can see it, Mubarak in Egypt, having all this great power, and now he's sitting in a jail over there, jail clothes on, waiting to be brought to trial so they can have a national day of happiness when they hang him. That's all that he's got left. Here's this great, powerful king for 30 years. Now then, he's sitting there waiting on the gallows, and everybody's happy because they want to set the day so they can have that happy day. He said, I don't care who you are, whether you're poor or whether you're powerful. There is an equalizing force in this world, and we all depend on the same source, is what he's saying. Now, he who loves silver will not be satisfied with silver, nor he who loves abundance with increase. This also is vanity. So now here again, he comes back to these riches. Now, if you love abundance, you will be satisfied with it. If you love increase so that you can increase your income, you'll never be satisfied with it. If that's what you love, is the abundance. Now, the abundance is what you have above and beyond what you need. Now, if that's what you love, in other words, I need $100,000 to see me through life, and I have $1 million. I have an abundance. Now, if that abundance is what I love, boy, I have 900,000 more than what I need. If I just had 100,000 or 200,000 more, when I get that, if I could just, now as I raise my fingers, how high do you go before you run out of abundance? How high do you go before you run out? There is no limit. And you can't be satisfied if that is what makes you happy in life. Or if you're satisfied with silver, if that's it, you can't be happy with it if you're in love with it. Can't be happy with that because you'll want more and more. Paul said in 1 Timothy 6, he said something about, for the love of money. You remember what he said? For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. He didn't say it's the root of all evil, but he said it's the root of all kinds. Any kind of evil that there is out there for a person. If they love money, then they have the temptation for every kind of evil that there is known to man. He said then in the 11, when goods increase, they increase also who eat them. So what profit hath the owner except to see them with their eyes? So I said, now here's the problem. Here it is that I have everything that I need, but I want to make a lot more money. Okay, so I make a lot more money. Now, what happens? Well, in order to make that money, I've got to spend some money. And in order to spend some money, I've got to hire some other people. And so now I've got to hire another 50 people to take care of this job, and I have them now, the responsibility of them. And so as I get richer and richer and richer, I have more responsibility, and I don't have the freedoms that I used to have. See? So you give up all of those freedoms. So you say, he said, so what is the profit? What is the profit of having it? So I need 100,000. I have $1 million. Next year I'll be making another 500 million. Now what's the profit? Well, he said the only thing it can possibly be is just looking at it. That's it. Let's suppose that you needed, for the rest of your life, suppose you needed 50 new pairs of pants, or you ladies, 50 new dresses. That's all that you need. Can't wear any more. You wear one a day, you can't wear any more. Now, what would be the benefit if you really need 50 of having somebody to drop off 500 on your porch? Or suppose they drop off 5,000. So now you ladies have 5,000 new dresses. What do you get out of it? You're only going to be able to wear so many. How will you enjoy the others? He said the only thing you could do is just looking at them. That's it. Now, what's all this for? All of this is to teach us that you can't find happiness in this world if money and riches is what you're striving for. If that's what will bring you happiness, then there's not enough money in this world to bring you happiness. So he's showing us this. Now, he's going to go on next week, and he'll talk more about riches. And you say, why is he talking so much about riches? Well, you ask yourself, what is the most, or the greatest temptation, I guess there is, in the land? Is it to have lots of money, riches, or is it to, what is it? And you say, yep, that's right up there. That is up there. All right, he's trying to show us, here's what happens when you become that rich. Okay, our time is up for today. Thank you.